The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
I'm guessing you have not forgotten about that huge NSA surveillance program that collects the phone records of millions of Americans in bulk completely haphazardly. A federal appeals court has ruled that the program is not authorized. Now, I want to be very, very precise here with the language I use, because when this ruling came out late last week, a ton of the stuff that was written in response to it was a little bit disconnected from the reality of what was said. So the Patriot Act has been mentioned off and on as the sort of justification for the NSA surveillance that we've been talking about now for a long time on the program. But the Second U.S. Circuit of Appeals in Manhattan said that the Patriot Act did not actually authorize the NSA to collect Americans' calling records in bulk. Sounds like a huge definitive ruling, right? But wait a second, let's take it a couple steps at a time. Number one, what evidence do we have that the NSA ever cared whether what they were doing was authorized? That's question one, Lewis, and I think we know the answer to that.
Yeah, we are well aware of this.
The other thing is that the appeals court did not really make a substantive ruling on the legality or lawfulness of the NSA's bulk data collection scheme. They didn't talk about whether it's constitutional or not. They just said, based on the case that was appealed to us, this particular type of NSA surveillance was not authorized. It was not authorized. So yes, the appeals court is on the record as saying the program as carried out is not kosher. But for those who are saying, huge victory, the type of surveillance is inherently illegal, that just didn't happen, Lewis.
And you could make all sorts of constitutional arguments that it's illegal anyway. Lots of experts will agree with you. Lots of experts won't. I mean, we still have this system in place, and it's not going to go anywhere because our government has basically declared it legal.
And putting that aside for a second, we still have a situation where, fine, it's not authorized, or fine, it's not legal, but now what do? Will this put any pressure on Congress to decide, oh, this is something that we're not going to do anymore? The key thing to keep in mind is that we did not see a ruling that this is certainly not a ruling that it's unconstitutional. And even a ruling that that the techniques themselves are illegal is not what we saw. We saw that the techniques are not authorized. It's hard for me to actually ascertain what people truly think about this type of surveillance, because if it's soon after some kind of an attack like 9/11, as we saw, people's willingness to accept this type of surveillance goes way up. If it's not near an attack and it's connected with some kind of whistleblowing sort of opera type of stuff, people get much more angry and opposed to the surveillance. But when can we say now the country as a whole is at a sort of equilibrium state where they're not forgetting about the fact that attacks happen, and they're also not completely traumatized by the fact that an attack just happened? Here is sort of the real opinion about surveillance from the country. I don't know that we can even really get that.
I don't think we can. Similar things have just happened. There was an attack in Canada, and immediately following that attack, you have Patriot Act type legislation. In France, there's the Charlie Hebdo attack. Immediately after that, you have something similar. I think it's human nature. We want it, and then after it's there, we don't.
Darrell Issa, the richest congressman in the United States, says that the world is envious of the poor people here in the United States. He was interviewed by CNN Money. He said, he was asked, listen, you're super rich. Do you feel a responsibility to do something about income inequality? Go. Here is what he said.
As one of the wealthiest members of Congress, do you feel personally responsible at all to address income inequality here in the U.S.?
Absolutely. America is the richest country on earth because we've been able to put capital together, and we've been able to make our poor somewhat the envy of the world. If you go to India or you go to any number of other third world countries, you have two problems. You have greater inequality of income and wealth. You also have less opportunity for people to rise from the have-not to the have.
So his personal wealth is by far the greatest of any member of Congress. His net worth 2 years ago was close to $500 million, according to the Center for Responsive Politics. This stems from a car alarm business that he built up. So a lot of what he's saying is kind of BS. Yes, it's true that being poor in some undeveloped countries in hyper rural areas is certainly worse than being poor in, for example, Northampton, Massachusetts, where our program originally started. No question about that. But America's poor are much less upwardly mobile than are the poor in just about any other developed country. It's harder for any American to climb the economic ladder here relative to peers in that same sort of income range in other countries, according to University of Ottawa professor Miles Korak. This is a fine argument, right? Okay, it's worse in other countries. That's an accurate argument. But it's not really a good argument for not solving the problem that we have here. Just over the weekend, I was really affected. I was on the subway here in New York, and there's always different people asking for money or doing something else, asking for food. But there was a woman, clearly very mentally ill, clearly very physically ill, claimed to have colon cancer. Whether or not she had colon cancer, she had serious, clearly surgical scars all down her neck, and you could see on her legs as well. Unclear what that's connected to. She had 2 teeth. She could barely speak. It was so upsetting, not only because of this individual, right? The individual and the empathy that you feel there, but also because it's completely optional, right? We have the resources. We've done tests in small parts of our country to see what happens if we do this with regard to addressing the very poor. What if we do that? And we know, Lewis, that we have any number of solutions that would be effective, and we're just choosing not to do it. And Darrell Issa saying, hey, it's worse in other countries is just a ridiculous way to laugh off the problem.
Issa was quick to compare us to India and other third world countries, but I don't think you'll see him comparing us to Sweden or other Scandinavian countries or Switzerland, countries where they have this under control, because that's where we should be.
Our rich have it better than the rich in many countries. In a lot of countries, the rich have to be in fear of being kidnapped for ransom or whatever. So should the American rich just stop complaining about taxes and about whatever it is they're complaining about? Because listen, the rich in other countries have it worse. I don't think that logic would work for Darrell Issa.
Probably not. And we've talked about him before. He seems like quite the character. And in this case, he's either lying or he's completely ignorant.
We've been talking about Bernie Sanders as the real progressive candidate for 2016. And 5 days ago, there was an article published by Slate called Bernie Sanders Gun Nut. And it points out that, yes, Bernie Sanders is, of the current candidates, by far the most progressive on almost every issue. But there is an issue in which Bernie Sanders is far to the right of Hillary Clinton. And Slate writes, during his time in Congress, Sanders opposed several moderate gun control bills. He supported the most odious NRA-backed law in recent memory, one that may block Sandy Hook families from winning a lawsuit against the manufacturer of the gun used to massacre their children. And it goes all the way back to 1993, when then Congressman Bernie Sanders voted against the Brady Act, which all that did was mandate federal background checks for gun purchasers and restrict the access of felons to firearms. As a senator, Bernie Sanders has supported bills to allow firearms in checked bags on Amtrak trains, to block funding to any foreign aid organization that registered or taxed Americans' guns. So this is a real thing. He has since endorsed some modest gun control measures. Now, in fairness to Bernie Sanders, he also doesn't always see eye to eye with the NRA. And in fact, I looked up the NRA's rating of Bernie Sanders, and they rated him as a D-. And for me, if the NRA gives you a low rating, that's a positive thing. What do you think about this, Lewis? Should we be thinking of, I don't know, the context of Vermont? Vermont, a state that is very rural with a very low population, where having guns is much more a part of the sort of fabric of the state without having a high crime situation. How should we explain or think about this?
It could be that that spending time in Vermont and being in Vermont has something to do with this. You know, I don't care too much about this, to be honest, because I agree with him on almost everything else, and I think he is one of the smartest guys out there, and of course, one of the most progressive. So I think, even though I want stricter gun control, that Bernie is still going to be my guy despite this.
Yeah, I support strict gun control. I support background checks, etc. I dislike the NRA. I think that they're out there simply to capitalize on any opportunity, either more crime or less crime, to justify more guns as the result, as the intended result for their clients, which are the gun companies. I don't agree with Bernie Sanders on a lot of these votes, but by and large, I still agree with Bernie Sanders about so much more than with any other candidate. So I completely respect Slate for writing this. Everybody should know all of the positions of anyone they're considering voting for or not voting for. But for me, it pales compared to the issues on which I agree with Bernie Sanders so much more strongly than with any other candidate. Now, another candidate with whom I agree on almost nothing is Ben Carson. Republican candidate Ben Carson was one of the featured speakers at the National Day of Prayer gathering in Washington, D.C. He told what I can only describe as an utterly delusional story about the time that God helped him ace his college chemistry final by giving him the answers in a dream. He was explaining how if he didn't pass this chemistry class, his dream of being a doctor would have essentially evaporated. And then here is his story of God coming to him and giving him the answers to a chemistry final.
So there I was, night before, thinking about my life. I said, Lord, medicine is the only thing I ever wanted to do. I always thought that's what you wanted for me. And yet, it looks like I'm going to fail chemistry. I'm not going to go to medical school. I said, so would you please tell me what it is you really want me to do? Or alternatively and preferably, work a miracle. And I picked up that big chemistry book. I was going to learn the whole thing that night. And of course, I fell asleep. Dreamed I was in this large auditorium, just me, and a nebulous figure working out chemistry problems. And I awakened early in the morning. That dream was so vivid in my mind. I picked up my book. I started looking up the stuff that I dreamed about. And when I went to take the test the next morning, it was like the Twilight Zone. I opened that book and I recognized the first problem as one of the ones I dreamed about. And the next, and the next, and the next. And I aced the exam and, got a good mark in chemistry. It worked out okay. But
that's right, Lewis. God helps some people with their chemistry tests, while he allows hundreds of thousands of others to die from diseases and freak accidents. Fascinating, right? God got Ben Carson a great parking spot at the mall after telling him where he had left his keys. Meanwhile, starving children in Africa are dying by the tens of thousands. But God works in mysterious ways, Lewis. Don't you dare question it.
Very mysterious. I think that this story, if I didn't know better, I would say this story is just totally made up nonsense.
Yeah, it's like an Onion story.
Yeah, well, I think he's really, really pandering here and trying to win over the religious right, and that's what this sounds like to me.
Yeah, this guy wants to be president, and some people think he should. I mean, think about the contrast, Lewis. Ben Carson is out there saying God gave him chemistry answers. Meanwhile, Bernie Sanders is trying to have a conversation about how can we establish a basic level of health care for everybody, regardless of ability to pay. How could the contrast be more clear?
See, that's just it. I think for many voters, they have this focus on the person instead of that person's positions. And Bernie Sanders is talking about complicated stuff, and maybe people don't want to hear it. Maybe people want to hear what kind of car Bernie Sanders drives and what he listens to when he's rocking out in that car.
Just delusional stories from Ben Carson, and a portion of the electorate seems to like this stuff. People were cheering this story at the National Day of Prayer. It really makes me very skeptical about the future of this country if the group that thinks this is a good story from a presidential candidate, oh, God gave him chemistry answers. Yeah, let's consider voting for that guy. If that's any significant portion of the American electorate, we are in trouble. If I'm wrong, tweet me, twitter.com/dpackman.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Hey, if you like this show at all, you might consider supporting it through a David Pakman Show membership. Today's new member of the day is Rex Michener. Rex Michener, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. You can join Rex and read about all of the great member benefits, including the extra world-famous bonus show just for members at davidpakman.com/membership. If you ever shop on Amazon.com, you can also support the work we're doing by just going to our website before shopping. You'll see at davidpakman.com that there is an Amazon banner on the right side of the page, which you can click, bookmark, and use whenever you shop. Over the last few days, Lewis, a lot of people buying Game of Thrones DVDs. I still have not seen more than half of an episode of the show, and everybody tells me I really need to get into it.
You do. It is, I think it has become my favorite show, and you have a lot to catch up on. So I would highly recommend you do that.
If I don't like Lord of the Rings, though, might I still like Game of Thrones?
There's still that that fantasy element, but it's much less pronounced. It's way grittier and way more violent, and it's just great writing.
A lot of air conditioners also being purchased. Very smart to purchase them now before it gets really hot, at least in the Northeast. I'm actually, our temporary studio before the new Boston studio is going to require me to get one of those. Because of the windows, Lewis, I won't be able to put in like a regular air conditioner, and there's no central air. So I think I'm going to need to buy one of those where it kind of sits in the center of the room, and it just has an exhaust tube that goes to the window. I hopefully those work well. I have no idea.
Well, if you remember, in our very first studio, we used one of those.
Yeah, and it was incredibly loud.
They are very loud, yeah. But perhaps, there are some quieter ones.
Hey, I've told you about Republican candidate Mike Huckabee and how he has been shilling for quack cancer and diabetes cures for a long time through the mailing list that he runs. And he went on 2 different channels, and 2 different hosts asked him about it. First was Bob Schieffer on CBS's Face the Nation, where he was asked about the diabetes cures. And Bob Schieffer has diabetes, and they talked about that. Let's listen to what Mike Huckabee had to say.
Governor, let me ask you, Ron Fournier of National Journal, who will be on this broadcast later today, writes that while you are talking as a populist, a blue-collar populist, you have lent your name for money to questionable products. And he points out that an infomercial you made for a diabetes cure is simply not supported by the medical community. What about that?
Well, there's going to be a lot of criticism thrown my way. One of the things that I have said is that the particular plan you're talking about is about the healthy eating, watching the kind of foods one takes in. And, I don't have to defend everything that I've ever done. I'm not doing those infomercials, obviously, now as a candidate for president. But if that's the worst thing somebody can say to me is that I advocated for people who have diabetes to do something to reverse it and stop the incredible pain of that, then I'm going to be a heck of a good president.
Well, Governor, I have diabetes, and I agree with you, and most doctors will tell you, you have to lose weight, you have to have a nutritious diet, but you were also selling pills of some sort, were you not?
No, there was not. That's a misnomer. One of the elements of the plan was dietary supplements, but it's not the fundamental thing. The fundamental thing is always, as you and I both know, it's exercise, it's good eating habits, it's maintaining sugar levels, it's not eating a bunch of junk food.
It's funny, on the one hand, he says that the infomercials were fine, that they were giving mostly advice just about good nutrition, but he also makes it clear that he's also not doing that stuff anymore. So if it's not something to distance himself from, then what's the point of making sure everybody knows that he's not doing it? I actually wish that Bob Schieffer had asked him about the cancer cures rather than the diabetes stuff, which fortunately CNN's Jake Tapper did ask Mike Huckabee about. Check this out.
In January, sir, you rented out your email list to a group selling hidden cures for cancer embedded in Bible verses for the low price of $72. Don't you lose credibility by attaching your name to things like that?
Well, I never signed that letter. I mean, I have a huge email list that I developed over many years, and we did, in fact, rent it out to entities. But my gosh, that's like saying that you run some ads on CNN. Do you personally agree with all the ads that run on CNN? I doubt you do. I'm sure there's some for maybe, I don't know, catheters or adult diapers. They're not products that you use or that you necessarily believe in. I don't hold you responsible for that. And in that same way, I don't think people who understand how advertising works would hold me responsible for something that I didn't personally sign up for or endorse.
With all due respect, sir, I think that's kind of a false equivalence. We're talking about medical devices on one hand, catheters and adult diapers, and you're talking about something that I think a lot of people would consider to be hucksterism in terms of Bible verses curing cancer.
Well, once again, I just say that if people buy the advertising space, whether it's on your channel or in that case it was in essence my channel, it doesn't mean necessarily that I'm personally identifying it with it any more than I would expect you to identify with any and everything that's sold on CNN, because my guess is you probably don't control all those things, and I didn't actually run that part of my company.
Did anyone else find it hysterical that Tapper used the word hucksterism to refer to what Mike Huckabee was doing? I see him as Mike Hucksterbee. Yeah,
I think that was obviously intentional, and Huckabee, I'm sure, did not like that one. But Huckabee is he's distancing himself from this, and he's trying to make it seem at the same time that he wasn't involved with or had nothing to do with, or I didn't know about this.
Yeah, it's just like an advertisement that runs on your show. You know, it doesn't really have anything to do with it.
It's a little more intimate than comparing the advertisements that run on CNN.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that Jake Tapper has very little control over what runs on CNN. I don't believe that Mike Huckabee has very little control about who rents his mailing list. And we have a good example here. We were just contacted by a company. We have a new company that does some ad sales for us for some of our platforms. And they recently reached out to me. They said, David, we've got a supplement company that really wants to advertise with you. And I looked at it, and I looked at what they were offering, and I looked at the claims that they were making, and they were offering an amount of money that to us would have been significant. But I can't in good conscience run those ads and say, hey, it's just an advertiser. It has nothing to do with our views. No, I wouldn't do that. I would feel like a creep doing that. And we turned it down, and it's unfortunate because obviously the show would benefit from having additional ad revenue, but I'm not going to run that.
Yeah, I think now Huckabee is going to regret selling out because it seems to be a hot talking point when he's being interviewed, and this is great.
The other funny thing is he talks about, it was mostly about eating right and nutrition and promoting that. Isn't that the same thing Michelle Obama's been promoting for years, that the right craps on her for? And now Huckabee and Huckabee and company are super critical of Michelle Obama for promoting healthy eating. And now he's saying, oh, no, it's not pills. It's mostly just healthy eating that you pay for to learn how to do it.
Yes, nice backtracking there. Unfortunately, it is very clear what he was doing.
George W. Bush's decision to invade Iraq is maybe one of the biggest foreign policy errors by an American president in decades, right? What would be the opinion of invading Iraq from the seemingly more intelligent, more pragmatic, more moderate Jeb Bush? Well, he says he would have done the exact same thing. Quote, I would have authorized the invasion. And he went on to add, and so would have Hillary Clinton, just to remind everybody, and so would have almost everybody that was confronted with the intelligence that they got. That's what he said to Fox News' Megyn Kelly. But he did acknowledge, at least, that the intelligence that everybody saw was faulty. What he ignored is, why was this intelligence presented? So it's this ridiculous circle where he says, listen, if I had gotten the same information that George W. Bush got, then I would have made the same decision. Right. But a lot of the information that was presented by the Bush administration was done at their choice, right? They didn't have to go and say, we're going to present a case with faulty and kind of tenuous information. They chose to do that. And Colin Powell is on record as saying he knew he was putting together a case with faulty information. So while Jeb Bush has admitted that some mistakes were made with regard to foreign policy by George W. Bush, the fact that he's saying I would have done the exact same thing is very disturbing.
And I think he is probably right in saying that Hillary might have done the same thing. I mean,
Yeah.
Hillary voted in favor of it, right?
Yeah, he's not wrong. That doesn't justify it.
No, that is true. But I think the majority of those in the Senate probably would have. I think it's deep here what was going on and why this decision was made. Obviously, it has more to do with the information that was presented.
Can you imagine Jeb Bush essentially saying, hey, if I were president, my Middle East policy would really be dictated significantly by what my brother did when he was president? Head for the hills, right? I mean, there could be no Republicans since Bush left office have used George W. Bush with minor exceptions to campaign for anything, right? It's like, don't talk about this guy. And now Jeb Bush is saying, oh, I would have done the same thing as W. Would have gone right into Iraq there. Very, very scary. Next, Luke Vargas has been in Russia. He's going to tell us about it. Stay tuned.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to The David Pakman Show.
Luke Vargas is United Nations Bureau Chief for Talk Radio News Service. He has joined us from Jordan, Poland, Colombia, Ukraine, Tunisia, Italy, and, now he's in the UK, but he was in Russia. Luke, tell us what you were doing there.
Well, I was there to cover a very interesting display of Russian military pride. This was the 70th anniversary commemorations of the defeat of Nazi Germany in World War II. It involved, among other events, the largest military parade in Russian history, which is saying quite a lot. That was on Saturday in Red Square. There were very few journalists there who were not state media. The sort of way the Kremlin was handling this was that if you were an official delegation, you could bring along members of the media because the Chinese president was there. A large number of Chinese journalists were also there. As an independent member of the media, it's a lot harder. So I had to do some wheeling and dealing to get to Red Square, but I made it work, not least with the help of some of the Russian I learned in high school, and was there on the cobblestones of the square for the big parade.
And how many bribes did you have to pay?
Luckily, none. There was almost an incident at the airport where I thought I was going to have to pay one. They told me to hang tight in the corner and wait for some security people to come, and I said, they turned away, and I decided to make for the gate. So I escaped Russia without paying a single bribe.
That's an accomplishment in and of itself, I think. So how patriotic is the feel amongst the Russian people, right? Because we've been talking for a while, particularly since the flare-ups with Ukraine and Russia, about, well, what does the Russian population really think about Vladimir Putin? Are they even willing to answer polls fairly, maybe based on fear of repercussion? So what was your sense of that?
Well, I wish I could be able to dig even more past just the short phrases people would tell me, but also, to read behind the optics, because Moscow, for the purposes of this parade, was completely overhauled from a visual standpoint. Just walking out of my hotel, crossing over the major thoroughfares in the city, the bridges are decked out in these flags. almost every billboard, and there are many more of them in Moscow than in the average American city, as well as those, ones near bus stops where you usually see, a poster for a new movie coming up that's lit from behind. Almost all of them, I'd say 90% of the ones in Moscow had been, I guess, bought out or taken over by the government and the organizing committee for this parade to display vintage photographs from the war. It was really kind of jarring at first, but actually sort of took on an emotional resonance with me that I didn't expect, to be standing at a bus stop or waiting for a subway train or just walking along the street and to see a larger-than-life poster of someone even younger than me who was fighting in 1945, smiling and looking down at you. It was almost like living a scrapbook of your grandparents' military memories as you walk around the city. And almost every public employee, as well as many people just working in average shops, are also wearing the St. George's Cross ribbon, a orange and gold sort of memorial ribbon that conjures up, the greatness of Russian history. That was ubiquitous around the city. I would go out and buy a Mars bar or buy a SIM card, and after I would transact the money, someone would reach into their cabinet at the shop and offer me a ribbon. I'm not sure if those individual store owners bought them, but they're, again, these are images that are being pushed out to the population. I wish I could have done, more thorough reporting, interviewing people. I wish more people spoke English that I talked to who could answer those questions. But it's hard to read behind the symbols and really gauge how people feel about it. But the reality is that this parade, these commemorations, are a part of Russian and before that Soviet history. Every year there's this parade, the same sort of routine. I think people have sort of built it into their calendars essentially to expect this kind of ceremony.
So tell us a little bit about the parade itself. How long did it go? That type of thing. And what heads of state were there?
Well, to answer that, I believe there were something like 67 invitations sent to heads of state and about 20 positive RSVPs. It's sort of an interesting cohort of folks who showed up, the most prominent among them being Xi Jinping, the Chinese president. The president, not prime minister, of India was there. Both of those countries also brought their armies with them to march in the parade. That's a big historic first. Other than that, an interesting cast of characters. Raul Castro of Cuba, Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela, Robert Mugabe of Zimbabwe. I was next to his official photographer during the ceremony. Jacob Zuma of South Africa. So I won't pass too much judgment on that.
Yeah, well, I will. I mean, quite a cast of characters indeed, to say the least, yeah.
Yes, the parade itself lasts about an hour and 15 minutes. It begins by all the soldiers, about 19,000 Russian soldiers of different regiments. They're not all soldiers from one unit, and they're not all from one place. The point is sort of to highlight the diversity of the Russian armed forces. You had the military unit that's assigned to guard the Russian railway systems, for example, a battalion from Crimea. So it's a very diverse cast of Russian troops who gather in the square. For about an hour before the ceremony begins, there are protocol officers that walk between all the lines of troops and inspect everyone, each piece of regalia that they are wearing. There are also photographers who came and photographed every single one of the military police who were guarding the media and sort of forming the perimeter of the square. They would photograph them, then offer corrections to their uniform, change the way their feet were aligned, and then photograph them again. I mean, I didn't think they were doing an art project. This is a way of making sure everyone is, holding to form. The parade, about an hour and 15 minutes. It begins with a speech from President Putin. I have to note, this is not like any speech I've seen in the U.S., where you would never be a special invitee like the 1,000 or so multiple thousands of veterans and special guests who were in the bleachers there without being able to see the president. I didn't even know it was him that was speaking. There was a sort of MC whose voice guided the whole ceremony. That ended and a new voice started speaking. It was a lot fainter, not as dramatic in the highs or lows, of sort of monotone, and spoke for about 5 minutes and then was over. I realized later, after the transcript was delivered to me, that was Vladimir Putin's speech. It wasn't as if everyone suddenly started paying attention. People were still sort of talking during it. It's because you can't see him. He faces away from the crowd. He faces, in fact, a wall across Red Square where there is nobody except a few state cameramen who are filming it. It's a ceremony designed for the cameras. It's almost unthinkable to think that special guests or political donors, for example, in the United States, would go to an event and not have a sightline to the person whose cause they've been supporting. That's just how it was in Red Square.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah, the parade begins, the troops come through, then you had the foreign armies come through. The People's Liberation Army, I have to say, was marching in incredibly tight formations, such that this crowd of veterans behind me who were only offering up relatively tepid applause for most of the different battalions, including the Russian ones that walked by, sort of fell into silence, began to talk amongst each other, and then started breaking out into applause. I think they were wowed at how disciplined they were. The Indians, a number of other countries marched through, and then you had the tanks, then you had the aircraft to wrap things up, and then almost at just a switches flicked, and all the guards sort of dissipate. Everyone can start walking through Red Square. It's amazing. It goes from being so physically controlled to being a place where you can just roam around freely. You can go up and talk to the generals. I had a discussion with one of the Chinese commanders. I had a nice casual conversation with one of the generals of the Indian Grenadier Corps. It was amazing that, again, it just sort of in a second, it's over.
In the limited time we have left, I'd love to get you to just weigh in on, with regard to Russia's alliances, is the most interesting one the deepening ties with China, as you mentioned, China having a presence there, or is there another one that is more interesting?
I think the Chinese one is very interesting. On Friday, the day before the parade, 32 trade and investment deals were signed between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin. The two of them sat next to each other for the entire ceremony, as well as for a number of events throughout the week. We're also familiar with those images of President Obama sitting next to Vladimir Putin, how frosty they look. I mean, you don't need to know about the conflicts that they have to hash out. You can see it on them. The body language of Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin was very relaxed. They seem to be enjoying each other's company. Again, though, I've talked to economists, people who specialize in energy, because gas deals have been one of the biggest elements of the recent, sort of economic agreements made between these two countries. And they'll tell me, look, Russia is signing these deals. It looks like they're getting a lot done on paper, but they are very much the junior partner in these arrangements. We haven't even seen progress on a lot of these deals since some of them were signed a year ago, and they're going to be selling gas at sort of a discount, priced much lower than what they would like to be able to get on the open market. So again, you need to read behind the numbers and the numbers of deals here. In many ways, it looks like China is actually the one that's steering the relationship, at least with regards to a lot of these recent trade deals.
Very, very interesting, and great pictures also that Luke sent us. We've been speaking with Luke Vargas, United Nations Bureau Chief for Talk Radio News Service, joining us from London. Great to speak to you, Luke.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I read over the weekend that Joey Brush Jr., Georgia politician who has campaigned against mandatory motorcycle helmet laws, was killed in a motorcycle accident. And aside from that being really sad, I was interested in it because I've read a lot about helmet laws for both bicycles and motorcycles, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff to talk about there. Brush was killed on Thursday morning when a car pulled out in front of his Harley-Davidson motorcycle, according to the Augusta Chronicle. The driver of the other car, Kimberly Crouch, allegedly stopped at a stop sign, didn't see the motorcycle, and then when she tried to drive through the intersection, just ran him over. And two of the bills that he is most remembered for are, as I mentioned, one looking to repeal the helmet requirement, and one that would allow motorcyclists to treat red lights as stop signs if the bikes aren't big enough to trigger the sensor to change the light that some less populated parts of the country have. Was never able to get enough support for that no helmet law. Helmet's still required. As far as we know, he did wear a helmet. And this brings up a lot of interesting things. I had a motorcycle once for a while. I always wore a helmet when I drive through Connecticut, going from Massachusetts to New York. Connecticut has no helmet law, and it's jarring to see people on the highway with no helmet. on a motorcycle. But there's a sort of interesting counterpoint to helmet laws that is out there. And this exists a little more with bicycles than it does motorcycles, although it does apply to both. No one denies that you're more likely to die from a bike accident or motorcycle accident if not wearing a helmet. But there's an interesting question as to whether you're more likely to get into an accident when wearing a helmet versus not wearing a helmet. And there's also another question altogether. With the frequency of pedestrians being hit by cars, where if you just walked around all day with a helmet, you would be drastically reducing the odds that you would die from getting hit by a car when crossing the street or even walking on the sidewalk and a car goes on the sidewalk. There is a slightly arbitrary nature, according to some, to saying, oh, if you bike and motorcycle, you should wear helmets, but not for walking, when we know that the prevalence of people getting hit and killed by cars as pedestrians is also really high, Lewis.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about. I think the argument against helmets on motorcycles is it's a freedom thing. And let's face it, if you are on the highway and you get into an accident on your motorcycle at speeds of 60 plus miles per hour, a helmet's going to be pretty negligible, right?
I don't deny that. And at the same time, I support helmet laws and I support wearing helmets. And if you do, in most situations, if you get into an accident on a motorcycle or a bicycle, you're better off wearing a helmet. But what about this question? Do cars pass closer to bicyclists and motorcyclists who wear helmets, putting them at more risk, right? It's very hard to really study that. Also, do helmet laws, by virtue of putting more helmets on the road, make others think of bicycling and motorcycling as more dangerous, which reduces the number of people who want to do it, making the drivers of vehicles less used to motorcycles and bicycles on the road? These are questions that, to my knowledge, have not been studied specifically, but are really interesting questions around helmets. And to be clear, these are thought experiments. I support helmet laws and I support wearing helmets.
And we force people to wear seatbelts, so why can't we, how is it different with helmets? That being said, I'm still not sure what side of this I fall on.
Yeah, I don't either. I always wore a helmet. I do when I bike, and I support the laws, but there are some really interesting studies that I would love to see done. Broader topic that we've talked about is that of unabashed corporatism and militarism in professional sports, including in the Super Bowl and in professional football. And you might have seen the constant honoring of members of the military during football games, particularly if you go to games. And it has been revealed that numerous teams, including, as revealed by the New York Daily News, the New York Jets, have received $377,000 from the U.S. Department of Defense and the New Jersey National Guard over the last 4 seasons to honor military members at home games. The Jets and 13 other teams took almost $5.5 million in taxpayer money from 2011 to 2014 to give shout outs to America's war heroes. And they make it seem like they just really appreciate them. When you watch it, it really does seem, Lewis, like, hey, we're patriotic, we support the troops, and we like doing this. And it turns out that a lot of these teams were taking big sums of money to do this.
It is strange. You do watch it, and it really seems like they're being proactive, and they are saying, "Look, we salute the troops, we support the troops." But it looks like a lot of this is our tax dollars funding this charade.
That's the question. Should our tax dollars be funding the sort of soft propaganda of the NFL teams and other sports teams, making it seem as though they're doing this just out of sheer patriotism, but these are paid placements? The Jets went on the defensive saying, oh, we are all about supporting the troops even before we were getting the cash. Nothing changed. Now we're just getting cash to do it. And I've been watching a lot of the NBA playoffs lately and a ton of ads for the military. I'm sure it has been studied, right? And they've determined you're better off advertising for the military during sports than during Mad Men and The Daily Show. I don't doubt that, but it is a question of, do I want my tax dollars being used for these product placements in football games? My answer would be no.
Yeah, then we can get into the discussion. Is it even ethical or does it make sense for our tax dollars to be used by the military for the sole purpose of advertising in the first place. Is that something that should happen?
Send me your thoughts on this. This is a lot of people have drastically different opinions on this, and I'd be curious to hear where our audience ends up. Our voicemail number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Let's take a listen to a voicemail here. Very interesting one.
Hey, David, I really like the show. I just want to know, what do you think of the black people? Because seems like they're going crazy with the riots in Baltimore and Ferguson. And, I mean, I don't know. What should Americans do about these crazy black people? Thank you.
I've never been asked on the show, just, David, what's your opinion of black people? I consider them people just like anybody else, Lewis. I like black people, and I don't know how else to answer the question.
But what do you do about crazy black people?
I guess if they're truly crazy, you ideally handle them with the exact same dignity that should be afforded to everybody, regardless of race. And their race does not become a lens through which the dealing with is seen. I don't know. I'm so stunned by the question.
It's an odd question. I suppose the best answer is that if there's a black person who's crazy, you try and get them mental help.
The NSA's Skynet program will be discussed on today's bonus show, as well as a font based on Einstein's handwriting. A Chinese theme park has a cremation, death, and rebirth simulator. And we'll also talk about White Appreciation Day at a Colorado restaurant. Jam-packed bonus show. DavidPakman.com/membership to sign up.
The David Pakman Show at DavidPakman.com.